The envelope sat on my coffee table like a ticking bomb. Ivory paper, elegant calligraphy, the school crest embossed in gold. My 10-year high school reunion invitation. Most people would feel nostalgia, maybe excitement, perhaps a touch of anxiety about facing old classmates. But all I felt was ice crystallizing around my heart, because this wasn't just an invitation to reminisce. It was my invitation to revenge. 10 years. A decade since I'd given my heart to the boy with the crooked smile and promises that seemed to stretch into forever. A decade since I'd believed in happily ever afters. And 6 years since I discovered the horrifying truth about the man I thought I'd marry. I run my fingers over the raised lettering, a slow smile spreading across my face. I've been planning this moment for so long that it feels surreal to finally see it materializing. In exactly 4 weeks, I would come face to face with Michael Pearson again. And this time, I would be the one with the power to destroy. But let me start at the beginning. I met Michael during junior year of high school. I was the quiet, bookish type who'd rather spend lunch in the library than navigate the social minefield of the cafeteria. He was the charismatic baseball player with an easy laugh and grades good enough to keep him on the honor roll. We were paired for a semester-long history project, and I remember being simultaneously thrilled and terrified when Mr. Donovan called our names together. "You're Ellie, right?" he asked, sliding into the seat next to mine. He smelled like fresh laundry and that particular brand of body spray that seemed to be the uniform scent of popular boys. "Eleanor," I corrected automatically, then immediately wished I hadn't. Nobody called me Eleanor except my grandmother. But yeah, Ellie is fine. He smiled, that crooked, dimpled smile that would eventually become both my greatest comfort and my undoing, and said, "I like Eleanor better. It's more complete." Something fluttered in my chest. I remember thinking how strange it was that a simple preference for my full name could make me feel so seen. Over the following weeks, we spent hours researching the civil rights movement, hunched over textbooks in the library after school, fingers sticky with highlighter ink. At first, I was sure he'd try to coast on my work ethic, but Michael surprised me. He was thoughtful and diligent, offering insights that hadn't occurred to me. "You know," he said one afternoon as we were packing up, "I've seen you around for years, always with your nose in a book, and I always wondered what was going on in that head of yours." I laughed nervously. "Probably nothing interesting." "I disagree." His eyes held mine for a beat too long. "You notice things other people miss. You're just quiet about it." That was the moment, I think. The moment I began falling for him. Not because of the compliment, but because he had bothered to observe me at all when I'd spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. Our first kiss happened the day we got our A+ on the project. We were celebrating at the local diner, sharing a milkshake like some 1950s cliché that somehow didn't feel cliché at all. When he leaned across the table, I remember thinking with perfect clarity, this is it. This is the beginning of my real life. High school romances aren't supposed to last. Everyone knows that. They're practice relationships, training wheels before the real-world cycling begins. But Michael and I defied those odds. We graduated together, chose colleges just 45 minutes apart, and spent weekends shuttling back and forth between campuses. "Do you think we're crazy?" I asked him once during our sophomore year of college. We were lying on the narrow dorm bed, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady under my ear. "Staying together like this when everyone says college is for exploration?" He ran his fingers through my hair, the gentle tug against my scalp sending shivers down my spine. "Maybe, but I'd rather be crazy with you than sane with anyone else." He tilted my chin up to look at him. "I'm going to love you forever, Eleanor." That's not a line or an exaggeration. It's just math. "Math?" I laughed. "Simple calculations. When I factor in how I feel when I'm with you versus how I feel when I'm not, the difference is too significant to ignore. It's empirical evidence." "You're such a nerd," I teased, but inside my heart was soaring. We graduated college and found jobs in the same city, Portland. I landed an entry-level position at a publishing house, while Michael began climbing the corporate ladder at a marketing firm. We moved into a tiny apartment together, assembled IKEA furniture while bickering good-naturedly, and adopted a temperamental cat named Fitzgerald. For 4 years, we built what I thought was the foundation for our future. Weekend farmers markets, wine-tasting trips to Willamette Valley, game nights with the small circle of friends we'd cultivated. We talked about marriage as an eventuality rather than a possibility. I started a Pinterest board for wedding ideas. He started a savings account for a ring. Then came the job offer in Seattle. "It's only 3 hours away." Michael said, his eyes bright with excitement as he paced our living room. And it's a huge opportunity. Director of Digital Strategy. That's a 5-year leap forward in my career trajectory. I know, I said, trying to match his enthusiasm while pushing down the selfish part of me that wanted to beg him to stay. It's amazing, and you deserve it. We can make it work, he insisted, kneeling in front of where I sat on the couch. I'll come back every other weekend. You can visit on the alternates. It's temporary, just until I can leverage this position into something back here, or until you can find something up there. I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course we'll make it work. For the first few months, we did. The train rides became my new normal. I'd grade manuscripts during the journey, then spend whirlwind weekends exploring Seattle with Michael or showing him what new restaurants had opened in Portland since his last visit. We texted constantly, had nightly phone calls, scheduled virtual movie dates where we'd stream the same film simultaneously. But gradually, imperceptibly at first, things began to change. His weekend visits became less frequent. A big campaign launching? He'd explain, or the whole team is working overtime on this pitch. When I'd visit Seattle, he seemed distracted, often needing to step away for work calls. I'm sorry, he'd say, genuine remorse in his eyes as he'd kiss my forehead. Once we get through this quarter, things will calm down. I believed him because I loved him, and because the alternative was too painful to consider. 6 months into our long-distance relationship, I decided to surprise him for his birthday. I took Friday off work, packed an overnight bag, and caught an early train to Seattle, bubbling with excitement at the thought of his face when I showed up unannounced. I'd never been to his apartment without him. He always met me at the station, but I had his address and the entry code he'd given me for emergencies. This wasn't exactly an emergency, but it was his 27th birthday, and I was carrying a small cake from his favorite bakery in Portland. The apartment building was nicer than I expected, sleek and modern with a doorman who barely glanced at me when I mentioned I was there to surprise my boyfriend. The elevator whisked me to the 14th floor, and I found apartment 1407 at the end of a long hallway. My hand hesitated over the keypad. Should I knock? No, that would ruin the surprise. I punched in the code, his birthday, predictably, and heard the lock click. Michael? I called out as I stepped inside, in case he was home working remotely as he sometimes did. No answer. The apartment was silent. I set the cake on the kitchen counter and looked around, taking in my surroundings. The place was minimally decorated but tasteful. Very Michael. A leather couch faced a wall-mounted TV. A dining table with 4 chairs sat by a wall of windows with a stunning view of the Sound. A hallway presumably led to the bedroom and bathroom. It struck me then how strange it was that I'd never seen his space before. He'd always had a reason why it wasn't a good time. It was messy, the building was doing renovations, the heating was acting up. Small excuses that seemed innocent enough individually, but now formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Something felt off. The apartment didn't feel lived in. No mail scattered on the counter, no dirty dishes in the sink, no sign of the organized chaos that had always characterized Michael's living spaces. It was too perfect, like a model home. I wandered down the hallway, my unease growing with each step. The bathroom was pristine, a single toothbrush in the holder, generic soap by the sink. The bedroom door was ajar, and I pushed it open slowly. The bed was made with military precision. The closet door was open, revealing a row of dress shirts and slacks, fewer than I would have expected for someone who'd been living here for months. The nightstand held a lamp, a charging phone, and a book. I was about to turn away when I noticed something on the dresser, a framed photograph. I stepped closer, expecting to see us together, maybe the shot from our trip to the coast last year. But it wasn't us. It was Michael with his arm around a woman I'd never seen before. They were on a boat, sunglasses on, wide smiles, the wind tousling her long blonde hair. They looked comfortable, happy, familiar with each other in a way that went beyond casual acquaintance. My stomach dropped as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. With shaking hands, I picked up the frame, studying the image more closely. In the background, I could make out what looked like the Chicago skyline. Chicago? Michael had never mentioned going to Chicago. I set the photo down and began opening dresser drawers, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The top drawer contained neatly folded men's underwear and socks. The second drawer held t-shirts and workout clothes. The third drawer made me freeze. Women's clothing, delicate fabrics and soft colors. I lifted a silky camisole, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Below the clothes were more photos. Michael and the blonde woman at various locations, on a beach at what looked like a family gathering, in front of a Christmas tree. My vision blurred with tears. I stumbled backward until my legs hit the bed and I sat down heavily, the camisole still clutched in my hand. This couldn't be happening. There had to be an explanation. A sister I didn't know about? A cousin? A roommate he'd failed to mention? But the intimacy in those photos couldn't be explained away so easily. And even as my mind scrambled for alternative explanations, a cold, rational part of me was connecting the dots that had been there all along. The decreased frequency of visits, the vague references to his life in Seattle, the way he always came to Portland rather than having me visit him, the mysterious work calls during our time together. With a sudden, terrible clarity, I realized I needed to know more. I pulled out my phone and, with trembling fingers, opened social media. I'd never been much of a social media person, and Michael had always said he preferred keeping his life private, off the internet. Now I understood why. I searched his name, but nothing came up. He must have blocked me or used different privacy settings. Then I searched the company he supposedly worked for in Seattle, scrolling through their employee pages. Michael's name wasn't there. Cold sweat broke out across my skin. I searched for him on LinkedIn instead and found his profile. According to LinkedIn, Michael Pearson was the marketing director at Apex Solutions, in Chicago, not Seattle. He'd been there for nearly 2 years. 2 years. While I thought he was 3 hours north in Seattle, he'd been halfway across the country, living a completely different life. I sat there for what felt like hours, cycling through shock, denial, and a devastating sense of betrayal. Eventually, I forced myself to continue my search. I needed to know the full extent of his deception. Through various social media connections and some light online stalking, I discovered that the blonde woman's name was Rebecca Taylor. She and Michael had apparently been together for at least 3 years, overlapping entirely with our relationship. They lived together in Chicago, where they both worked at Apex Solutions. According to one congratulatory post I found from about a month ago, they were engaged. Engaged. While I'd been faithfully riding trains back and forth, saving for our future, planning our life together, Michael had been building a completely different life with someone else. My phone buzzed with a text, startling me out of my daze. Michael, "Hey beautiful, just checking in. How's your day going?" I stared at the screen, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. How's my day going? I'd just discovered my entire relationship was a lie, that the man I loved had constructed an elaborate double life, and he was asking how my day was going as if nothing was wrong. I didn't respond. I couldn't. What would I even say? Instead, I took photos of the apartment, the pictures of him with Rebecca, the drawer of women's clothing. Evidence, though I wasn't sure what I intended to do with it yet. Then I placed the camisole back exactly as I'd found it, closed the drawers, and returned the framed photo to its spot on the dresser. I picked up the cake from the counter and left, making sure the door locked behind me. In the elevator, an elderly woman smiled at me and commented on how lovely the cake looked. "It's for a celebration," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "Oh, how wonderful! A birthday?" "No," I replied as the doors opened to the lobby. "A funeral." I walked straight to a garbage can outside the building and dropped the cake in, box and all. Then I made my way to the nearest bar. 3 whiskeys later, I still couldn't cry. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped away my insides and left nothing but an empty shell. My phone continued to buzz with texts from Michael, growing increasingly concerned at my silence. "Michael, everything okay? Michael, did something happen at work? Michael, Eleanor, you're worrying me. Please respond." It was the use of my full name that finally broke me. I like Eleanor better. It's more complete. One of the first things he'd ever said to me, now tainted like everything else. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed again. What do you say to the person who has systematically destroyed your ability to trust? In the end, I kept it simple. Me, I know about Chicago. I know about Rebecca. Don't contact me again. Then I blocked his number, deleted his contact, and ordered another whiskey. The bartender, a woman with kind eyes and a sleeve of colorful tattoos, eventually cut me off and called me a cab. I gave the driver my address in Portland, not caring about the astronomical fare it would cost to drive 3 hours instead of taking the train. I couldn't bear the thought of sitting on that train, the same one I'd taken so many times with a heart full of anticipation and love. The next few days passed in a blur. I called in sick to work, unplugged my landline, and shut off my phone. I pulled the blackout curtains and lived in darkness, emerging only to feed Fitzgerald and occasionally force myself to eat something. On the fourth day, there was an insistent knocking at my door. I ignored it until a voice called out, "Eleanor, I know you're in there. Your car's outside and you haven't been to work in days. I'm not leaving until you open up." Sophia, my best friend since college and the only person besides Michael who had a spare key to my apartment. I knew she'd use it if I didn't answer. I dragged myself to the door and opened it, wincing at the flood of hallway light. "Jesus Christ," Sophia gasped, taking in my appearance. I hadn't showered in days, was wearing the same pajamas I'd put on when I got home from Seattle, and imagined my face was as hollow and lifeless as I felt. She pushed past me into the apartment, immediately opening curtains and windows. "It smells like something died in here." "Something did," I said flatly. "My relationship, my trust, my future. Take your pick." Sophia turned to face me, her initial shock softening into concern. "What happened?" So I told her everything. The surprise visit to Seattle, the discovery of the other apartment, the other woman, the other life. As I spoke, she made coffee, forced me into the shower, and changed my bedding. By the time I finished my story, I was clean, the apartment was aired out, and daylight had reclaimed its territory from the shadows. "I'll kill him," Sophia said simply, handing me a mug of coffee. "I'm serious. I know people." Despite everything, I laughed, a rusty, broken sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "You don't know people. I could find people. The internet exists." I sipped the coffee, the warm liquid bringing me back to myself bit by bit. "He's not worth prison time." "Debatable." She sat across from me at the kitchen table. "So what are you going to do?" I stared into my mug. "I don't know." "What is there to do? He's engaged to someone else, living in Chicago. The Michael I thought I knew doesn't even exist." "You could tell her?" Sophia suggested. "This Rebecca person? She deserves to know she's engaged to human garbage." The thought had occurred to me, but something held me back. What if she already knows? What if they have some arrangement? Or what if she doesn't believe me? I'm just the crazy ex showing up with wild accusations. "You have evidence. Photos of an apartment and some social media stalking. Hardly conclusive." Sophia studied me for a moment. "This isn't like you, Ellie. The you I know would want the truth out there, come hell or high water." She was right. I'd always been passionate about honesty, about facing reality head-on no matter how painful. It was one of the things Michael had said he loved about me, my unflinching commitment to truth. He'd called it once. The irony wasn't lost on me. "I need time," I finally said. "I need to process all of this before I decide what to do about it." Sophia nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Whatever you need. But don't let him get away with this, Ellie. Not just for Rebecca's sake or for yours, but because men like Michael need to learn they can't play with people's lives like this." She stayed with me for the rest of the day, helped me clean up the apartment, and made sure I ate a proper meal. Before she left, she extracted a promise that I'd return to work the next day. "Living like a cave troll isn't going to help anything," she said firmly. "Plus, you need a distraction." She was right again. When I returned to work, the familiar routine of reading manuscripts and writing reader reports provided a blessed relief from the constant loop of betrayal playing in my mind. My colleagues were kind, accepting my vague explanation of a personal crisis without prying. Days turned into weeks. I functioned. I went to work, paid my bills, fed Fitzgerald, occasionally socialized when Sophia dragged me out. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. Where there had once been warmth and optimism, there was now a cold, hard kernel of anger that grew with each passing day. I thought I'd moved through the stages of grief. The shock and denial had given way to pain, then anger. But I seemed to be stuck in anger, unable to progress to acceptance or whatever was supposed to come next. 2 months after my discovery in Seattle, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject: "I'm sorry, Eleanor, I've been trying to reach you. I know you blocked my number and all my social media, and I understand why. What I did is unforgivable. I've been living a double life for years, lying to you and to Rebecca. There's no excuse for it. I want you to know that after you texted me that day, I came clean to Rebecca. Our engagement is off. My life is in shambles and I deserve it. But you didn't deserve any of this. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I would hurt the people I care about this way. The therapist thinks I have some kind of pathological fear of abandonment that manifests as creating backup relationships, never fully committing to one person because I'm terrified of being left. I know that's no consolation to you. I just wanted you to know that I really did love you. That wasn't a lie, even if everything else was. I won't contact you again if you don't want me to. But if you ever want to talk or yell at me in person or just get some closure, my door is open. With regret and love, Michael. I read the email 3 times, emotions churning inside me like a storm. He was sorry. He'd confessed to Rebecca. He was in therapy, examining his actions. He still loved me. None of it mattered. The damage was done. But one thing in his email planted a seed in my mind, never fully committing to one person because I'm terrified of being left. Was that true? Was the great love of my life nothing more than a man so frightened of abandonment that he'd created elaborate lies to ensure he always had a backup plan? I copied his email address and composed a new message. Subject: Re. I'm sorry, Michael. It took you 2 months to apologize, and you did it from a throwaway email account I couldn't easily trace or block. That tells me everything I need to know about the sincerity of your remorse. You didn't love me. Love doesn't lie for years. Love doesn't maintain separate lives in separate cities. Love doesn't propose to one woman while telling another they have a future together. What you loved was having a safety net. I was your plan B, your insurance policy against loneliness. Or maybe Rebecca was. I don't know which of us came first in your mind, and I don't care. Don't contact me again. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, not for anything. As far as I'm concerned, you died the day I found that apartment in Seattle. Eleanor. I hit send and then immediately blocked the email address. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness or fear. It was rage, pure, clarifying rage that burned away the last of my grief. That night, I dreamt of Michael. Not the Michael I'd loved, but the Michael who existed now in my mind. A manipulator, a liar, a coward. In the dream, I was exposing him publicly, watching his face crumble as everyone he knew learned the truth about him. I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before Seattle. Sophia had been right. I couldn't let him get away with this. Not for revenge exactly, but for justice. For myself, for Rebecca, for anyone else he might hurt in the future. But how? He'd already confessed to Rebecca, so that avenue of exposure was closed. I could try to contact his family or friends, but that felt petty and might backfire if they already knew about his duplicity or chose not to believe me. I needed something more comprehensive, something that would ensure the truth about Michael Pearson would follow him wherever he went. The idea came to me a week later as I was sorting through old mail and found an alumni magazine from our high school. Inside was a reminder about the upcoming 10-year reunion, still about a year away. Our 10-year reunion, where everyone who had known us as the perfect high school sweethearts would gather, where Michael had first promised to love me forever. It was perfect. I marked the date on my calendar and began to plan. First, I needed information. Where was Michael now? Had he stayed in Chicago after his breakup with Rebecca? Was he still at the same company? Had he found a new backup girlfriend yet? I created a fake social media profile, nothing that could be traced back to me, and began carefully monitoring what I could find about him online. It wasn't much at first, his privacy settings were tight. But over time, through mutual connections and public posts he was tagged in, I pieced together the outlines of his post-Rebecca life. He had indeed stayed in Chicago and at Apex Solutions. He appeared to be single, at least publicly. He'd joined a rock climbing gym, taken up photography as a hobby, and adopted a dog, a husky mix named Summit, according to the caption on one of the few public photos I could see. It was surreal, watching from afar as he rebuilt his life while mine still felt shattered. But each new piece of information I gathered became another brick in the foundation of my plan. The next step was to ensure I had concrete, irrefutable evidence of his double life. The photos I'd taken in Seattle were a start, but I needed more. I needed to document the timeline of his deception, gather testimonials from people who had known about us, collect evidence of his simultaneous relationships. I created a dedicated email account and reached out to Rebecca. Subject: Michael Pearson. Rebecca, you don't know me, but we have something significant in common. We were both deceived by Michael Pearson. My name is Eleanor, and until 6 months ago, I believed I was in a committed relationship with Michael for nearly 8 years, even while he was with you in Chicago. I only discovered the truth when I visited what I thought was his apartment in Seattle, where he told me he'd moved for work, and found evidence of his life with you. According to his email to me, he has since confessed everything to you and your engagement is off. I'm not contacting you to cause further pain, but because I'm gathering evidence of Michael's duplicity. If you're willing to share your side of the story or any proof of his double life that you might have, I would greatly appreciate it. My goal is to ensure he can't do this to anyone else. I understand if you'd rather not revisit this painful chapter. Either way, I wish you healing and a much better future than the one Michael was offering. Sincerely, Eleanor. I didn't really expect a response. Why would she want to talk to the other woman? But 3 days later, my phone pinged with an email notification. Subject, Michael Pearson, Eleanor. I debated whether to respond to your email. Part of me wanted to delete it and continue the healing process I've been working on since Michael's confession. But I keep thinking about what you said, ensuring he can't do this to anyone else, and I realize I want that too. Yes, Michael told me everything after you texted him. It was the most surreal conversation of my life. The man I thought I knew, who I was planning to marry, sat across from me and methodically detailed his years of deception. 2 apartments, 2 jobs. He wasn't lying about working at Apex. That was his real job. But he had some consulting arrangement in Portland he used as his cover story with you. 2 completely separate lives. When I asked him why, he gave me the same line about fear of abandonment that I'm guessing he gave you. Classic Michael, making his betrayal somehow about his pain. I don't know what you're planning, but I'd like to help if I can. I have text messages, emails, photos, a whole relationship's worth of evidence. Let me know what you need. By the way, I found out after we broke up that I wasn't the only one besides you. There was a woman in Minneapolis for a while, though I think that ended before you and I came into the picture. Once a pattern is established, I suppose it's hard to break. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. My hands trembled as I read her email. Another woman. Of course there was. The pattern was probably established long before I ever met him. Rebecca and I began corresponding regularly. We shared stories, compared timelines, sent each other evidence of our parallel relationships with Michael. It was strange and painful, but also unexpectedly healing to connect with someone who understood exactly what I'd experienced. It's like looking in a mirror sometimes, Rebecca wrote in one email. The stories you tell about him, the quirks you loved, the promises he made, they're identical to mine. Did he also have that thing about making breakfast for dinner on Sundays? He had. And the habit of leaving post-it notes with silly drawings in unexpected places, and the tradition of reading aloud to me when I was sick. All of these intimate details that I'd thought were unique to our relationship were apparently part of his standard repertoire. Over the months that followed, Rebecca and I assembled a comprehensive dossier on Michael Pearson's double life. Text messages sent minutes apart to each of us with nearly identical wording. Photos taken on the same day in different cities with different women. Calendar entries showing the elaborate system he used to keep his lives separate. We even managed to track down Vanessa, the woman from Minneapolis, who confirmed that Michael had indeed maintained a relationship with her for nearly 2 years before moving on to his dual life with Rebecca and me. He told me he had commitment issues, Vanessa wrote. The irony is, his problem wasn't lack of commitment, it was overcommitment to multiple women simultaneously. As the reunion date grew closer, my plan took clearer shape. I would attend, of course, and so would Michael. I confirmed this through casual inquiries to former classmates who were on the reunion committee. Apparently, he'd RSVP'd yes months ago. What he didn't know was that I'd be bringing receipts, literal and figurative. The most challenging part of my plan was staying emotionally detached enough to execute it effectively. Some days, working through the evidence with Rebecca reopened wounds I thought had started to heal. Other days, my anger burned so hot I feared I'd explode before the reunion even arrived. Sophia remained my steadfast supporter through it all. Just make sure this is really what you want. She cautioned one evening as we sorted through the materials I'd gathered. Revenge can be satisfying, but it can also keep you tethered to the past. This isn't just about revenge, I insisted. It's about truth. It's about consequences. Michael has spent years manipulating women without facing any real repercussions. That ends now. The day before the reunion, I met Rebecca in person for the first time. She'd flown to Portland to help me finalize preparations, and we'd agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I recognized her immediately from the photos, tall, blonde, with a warmth in her eyes that even Michael's betrayal hadn't extinguished. "This is weird, right?" she said as we hugged awkwardly. "Meeting your ex's ex who wasn't supposed to be his ex because you were supposed to be the only one?" I laughed despite myself. Definitely in the top 5 strangest moments of my life. Though finding your clothes in his drawer probably still ranks number 1. We spent the day together, reviewing our plan for the reunion and sharing stories that hadn't made it into our emails. It was surreal but cathartic, this friendship born from shared trauma. "Are you nervous about seeing him?" Rebecca asked as we parted that evening. I considered the question carefully. Not nervous. Ready. I've been preparing for this for so long that it almost doesn't feel real. How about you? Any regrets about not being there to see his face? She shook her head. No, this is your moment. I've had my closure. Tomorrow is about you getting yours. That night, I laid out my outfit for the reunion. A sleek black dress that projected confidence and a don't mess with me attitude. I packed my evidence in a small portfolio, checked and rechecked that everything was in order. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I realized that for the first time in a year, I felt something like peace. Whatever happened tomorrow, Michael's days of deception were numbered. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, as if the universe were smiling on my plans. I took my time getting ready, applying makeup with precision, styling my hair into soft waves, slipping into the black dress that fit like armor. "You look dangerous," Sophia said when she came to pick me up. She was my designated moral support, planning to wait nearby in case I needed anything. "In the best possible way? That's the goal," I replied, smoothing a hand over the portfolio containing a year's worth of meticulous planning. The reunion was being held at a vineyard just outside the city, a picturesque setting that under different circumstances might have been enjoyable. As Sophia drove, I rehearsed what I would say when I saw Michael, how I would execute each phase of my plan. "Remember," Sophia said as she pulled into the venue's parking lot, "no matter what happens in there, you've already won. You survived what he did to you. You rebuilt your life? This is just the cherry on top." I smiled at her, grateful beyond words for her unwavering support. "I know, but it's going to be a hell of a cherry." The vineyard's main building had been transformed for the occasion. Banners in our school colors hung from the rafters, tables were decorated with memorabilia from our high school years, and a slideshow of old photos played on a loop against one wall. I checked in at the welcome table, collecting my name tag and trying to ignore the curious glances from former classmates. News of my breakup with Michael had apparently made the rounds, not surprising in our social media age, and people seemed keen to see how we'd interact. They wouldn't have to wait long. I spotted him almost immediately, standing near the bar with a small group of former football players. He looked good. Of course he did. Hair slightly longer than he'd worn it during our relationship, a tailored blue suit that emphasized his athletic build, that same crooked smile that once made my heart race. Now it just made my skin crawl. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then Michael excused himself from his group and began making his way toward me, weaving through clusters of reminiscing former classmates. "Eleanor," he said when he reached me, voice carefully neutral. "You look beautiful." "Michael," I replied, equally controlled. "You look exactly like the man I thought I knew." He winced slightly at that. "I deserve that. I deserve a lot worse." "Yes, you do." I took a sip of the champagne I'd grabbed from a passing server, using the moment to steady myself. "And you're going to get it." Confusion flickered across his face. "What does that mean?" I smiled, cold and precise. "It means I hope you enjoyed your life as a respected member of society, because after tonight, everyone's going to know exactly who you really are." Before he could respond, I turned and walked away, heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and satisfaction. The opening salvo had been fired. Now it was time for the main event. I spent the next hour circulating through the reunion, reconnecting with old friends and acquaintances, biding my time. Michael kept shooting worried glances my way, clearly unsettled by our brief exchange. Good. Let him sweat. The moment arrived when the reunion committee chair, Amanda Delaney, took to the small stage set up at one end of the room. "Attention, everyone! It's time for our class superlatives." As you know, we sent out online polls before the reunion to update our senior superlatives 10 years later. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. I'd coordinated with Amanda weeks ago, offering to sponsor part of the reunion in exchange for 5 minutes of speaking time during the program. She'd agreed readily, assuming I wanted to promote my publishing company or some other professional venture. But before we get to those results, Amanda continued, "I'd like to welcome Eleanor Winters to the stage. Eleanor has generously contributed to making tonight possible and would like to say a few words." Murmurs of polite interest rippled through the crowd as I made my way to the stage, portfolio in hand. Michael stood frozen near the bar, his face a mask of growing realization and dread. "Thank you, Amanda," I said, taking the microphone. My voice came out strong and clear, betraying none of the nervous energy coursing through me. "It's wonderful to see everyone again after 10 years. A lot has changed for all of us, I'm sure. New careers, new relationships, new beginnings." I paused, scanning the crowd. All eyes were on me, including Michael's. He looked like he might bolt for the door at any moment. "Some of you might remember that Michael Pearson and I were high school sweethearts." Nods and smiles from the audience. We stayed together through college and beyond, building what I thought was a beautiful life together in Portland. The smiles began to fade as people sensed the shift in my tone. What I didn't know was that while I was planning our future, Michael was living a double life. For years, he maintained separate relationships in separate cities, complete with different apartments, different friend groups, different stories about his work and background. Gasps and whispers erupted. Michael took a step forward, then stopped, seemingly paralyzed by indecision. I discovered this by accident a year ago when I surprised him at what I thought was his apartment in Seattle. Instead of finding the man I loved, I found evidence of his engagement to another woman in Chicago, a woman named Rebecca, who he'd been with for as long as he'd been with me. I opened my portfolio and removed the first piece of evidence, a blown-up photo of Michael and Rebecca on the boat, the Chicago skyline behind them. I held it up for everyone to see. "This is Rebecca. She and I have become friends, bonded by our shared experience of being deceived by the same man. Together, we've documented Michael's elaborate system of lies. Next, I displayed a timeline we'd created, showing the overlapping relationships with dates, locations, and key events. While telling me he was building a life with me in Portland, he was simultaneously building one with Rebecca in Chicago. He proposed to her with money from a savings account I thought was for our future. He spent holidays with her family while telling me he was on business trips." Michael finally found his voice. "Eleanor, please. This isn't the place." "No, Michael, this is exactly the place." I cut him off, my voice hard. "This is where it all began. Where you first promised to love me forever. Remember? Behind the bleachers after the homecoming game senior year?" His face paled. He remembered. "And it wasn't just Rebecca and me," I continued, addressing the now silent crowd. "There was Vanessa in Minneapolis before us. Who knows how many others we haven't discovered yet?" I placed the timeline back in my portfolio and pulled out printed copies of text messages and emails, identical messages sent to different women, sometimes minutes apart. Michael isn't just a cheater. He's a calculated manipulator who created entirely separate lives, maintaining them for years through an intricate web of lies. He didn't make a mistake or have a momentary lapse in judgment. He systematically deceived multiple women about the most fundamental aspects of his life and our relationships. I could see the judgment in the eyes of our former classmates as they looked between me and Michael. Some seemed shocked, others disgusted. A few looked skeptical, but those expressions faded as I continued presenting evidence. "Why am I doing this?" I asked, anticipating the question. "Not for sympathy. Not even primarily for revenge, though I won't pretend there isn't satisfaction in finally exposing the truth. I'm doing this because people like Michael count on silence. They count on their victims being too embarrassed, too devastated, or too afraid to speak out." I locked eyes with Michael, who looked utterly defeated. "I want everyone who knows Michael Pearson to understand exactly who he is. I want potential employers, friends, and especially future romantic partners to go into any relationship with him fully informed about his character and history." I placed the last piece of evidence back in my portfolio and took a deep breath. "I've created a website with all of this information and more. The address is being sent to everyone's email right now, thanks to the reunion committee's distribution list." On cue, phones throughout the room began to ping and buzz with new email notifications. "I've also sent this information to Michael's employer, his professional networks, and his family. The truth doesn't hide anymore, Michael. Neither do I." With that, I handed the microphone back to a stunned Amanda and stepped off the stage. The room erupted in a chaotic mixture of conversations, exclamations, and movement as people immediately began accessing the website on their phones. Michael stood alone now, abandoned by the group he'd been chatting with earlier. As I walked past him toward the exit, he reached for my arm. "Eleanor," he said, his voice breaking, "you've destroyed me." I stopped and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a year. The man I'd once loved more than anything, now reduced to a pitiful figure in an expensive suit, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "No, Michael," I replied quietly. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows it." I walked away without looking back, the weight of the past year lifting from my shoulders with each step. Outside, Sophia was waiting in the car, windows down, music playing softly. "Well?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. "How do you feel?" I considered the question, taking stock of the emotions swirling inside me. Relief, certainly. A measure of satisfaction. Lingering anger, though less sharp than before. And something else. Something that felt surprisingly like freedom. I said slowly, like I can finally start moving forward. Sophia smiled and started the engine. "Where to?" I looked back at the vineyard, where my past was being thoroughly dismantled, then turned to face the road ahead. "Anywhere. As long as it's forward." As we drove away, my phone began lighting up with messages from former classmates, expressions of support, shock at Michael's behavior, admiration for my courage in speaking out. I silenced the notifications. I'd read them later, but for now, I wanted to simply exist in this moment of completion. The revenge I'd planned so meticulously was done. Michael would face the social and professional consequences of his actions. Rebecca and I had our closure. The truth was out. And I was free, not just of Michael, but of the anger and betrayal that had consumed me for the past year. Free to build a new life, one that wasn't defined by his deception or my response to it. As the vineyard disappeared behind us and the city lights loomed ahead, I felt myself smiling. A real smile, perhaps the first genuine one in longer than I could remember. "You know what's funny?" I said to Sophia as we merged onto the highway. "What's that?" "He really did love me forever. Just not exclusively." Sophia snorted with surprised laughter, and soon we were both giggling uncontrollably, the absurdity of it all finally breaking through the last of my defenses. In that moment of unexpected mirth, with the night air rushing through the open windows and the future unfurling before me like an open road, I knew with absolute certainty that I would be okay. More than okay. I would be magnificent. The days following the reunion passed in a blur of notifications, messages, and unexpected emotions. I'd thought exposing Michael would feel like the definitive end to our story, a period at the close of a painful chapter. Instead, it felt more like opening a floodgate, releasing not just my carefully cultivated revenge, but also a torrent of feelings I hadn't anticipated. "Your phone has been buzzing non-stop for 3 days. Sophia observed as we sat on my couch, sharing Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. "Are you ever going to check it?" I glanced at my phone, which I'd been keeping on silent and mostly ignoring since the reunion. The notification count had grown to an intimidating number. "Eventually," I sighed. "I'm just not ready for the Michael aftermath yet." "It might not all be about him," she pointed out, reaching for more pad thai. "You basically became a folk hero to half our graduating class. There's probably a lot of support in there too." She was right, of course. When I finally steeled myself to check my messages the next morning, I found dozens of supportive texts and social media messages from former classmates. Women I'd barely spoken to in high school were thanking me for my courage, sharing their own stories of deception, calling me brave and inspirational. Men were apologizing on behalf of their gender or expressing disgust at Michael's behavior. And then there were the messages from people directly impacted by my revelation. Michael's closest friends, divided between those defending him. Everyone makes mistakes, but public humiliation was cruel. And those distancing themselves, I had no idea, I swear. A terse note from his mother, whom I'd always been close with, simply saying she was processing everything and would reach out when she was ready. A surprisingly warm message from his sister, apologizing for her brother and thanking me for my honesty. The website I'd created documenting Michael's double life had received thousands of hits. The story had spread beyond our high school network, picked up by several social media accounts dedicated to relationship drama. Someone had created a TikTok summary that had gone semi-viral. I was simultaneously gratified that the truth was spreading and unsettled by how public it had all become. "You've gone internet famous," Sophia declared when I showed her the TikTok. "How does it feel?" "Weird," I admitted. I wanted people to know the truth about Michael, but I didn't exactly plan on becoming a hashtag. The hashtag in question was #Eleanor's Revenge, which people were using to share their own stories of betrayal and accountability. It was surreal seeing my personal pain transformed into something broader, a movement of sorts for people who'd been deceived and found their voice. Rebecca called on the 4th day after the reunion. "So," she said when I answered, "that went even bigger than we expected." "You could say that." I curled up in my reading chair, Fitzgerald purring in my lap. "Have you been getting as much fallout as I have?" "Some. Mostly people from Michael's life in Chicago wanting to confirm if it's all true. His boss called me personally." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That's all we ever needed to tell." She paused. "How are you doing, though?" "Really?" I considered the question. How was I doing? The initial rush of adrenaline and satisfaction had faded, leaving what exactly? "I'm recalibrating," I said finally. For so long, this plan was my focus, my purpose. Now that it's done, I'm trying to figure out what comes next. "I understand that," Rebecca said softly. "After we broke up, I threw myself into work for months. Didn't date, barely socialized. It was like I needed to relearn who I was without him, without the relationship I thought I had." "That's exactly it." I agreed, relieved that she understood. "I feel like I've been defining myself as the woman Michael betrayed, or the woman planning revenge on Michael for so long that I'm not sure who I am without those labels." "Well, who were you before him?" The question caught me off guard. Who was I before Michael? We'd gotten together so young, spent so many formative years as a couple, that it was hard to separate my identity from our relationship. Had I really invested so much of myself in him that I'd lost track of my own core? "I was ambitious," I said slowly, memories surfacing. "I wanted to be a literary editor. I wrote poetry. I had this whole plan to travel through Europe visiting the homes of famous authors." I laughed softly. "God, I haven't thought about that in years." "There you go," Rebecca said. "Start there." After we hung up, I sat for a long time with Fitzgerald, thinking about Rebecca's question and my answer. I'd abandoned many of my personal dreams during my relationship with Michael, adjusting my ambitions to accommodate our joint future. The publishing house where I worked was meant to be a stepping stone, not my final destination. The European literary pilgrimage had been deferred year after year for more practical considerations, saving for our future home, waiting until Michael's career stabilized. How many parts of myself had I set aside, believing there would be time later? How many aspects of my identity had I subsumed into being Michael's girlfriend, then Michael's betrayed ex, then Michael's nemesis? That night, I dug out my old journals from college, before Michael and I had gotten serious about building a life together. I flipped through pages filled with poetry, travel plans, career aspirations, and philosophical questions about life and literature. The voice in those pages was unmistakably mine, but she felt like a stranger, bolder, more independent, less concerned with fitting her dreams around someone else's. I grabbed a new notebook and began to write, not poetry or plans this time, but a simple list, things I want. Not things I wanted with Michael or in spite of Michael, just things I, Eleanor Winters, genuinely desired for my life. By dawn, I had filled several pages, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was looking at a map of my own making, leading to a future that was entirely mine to shape. The next morning, emboldened by my rediscovery of self, I finally answered the email I'd been avoiding since the reunion, from my former mother-in-law-to-be, Margaret Pearson. "Dear Eleanor, I hope this message finds you well, though I understand that's a complicated wish given the circumstances. I wanted to reach out to you directly, rather than joining the public discourse around what happened at your reunion. First, I want you to know that I believe you. Michael has confirmed everything. He's been staying with us since the event, trying to navigate the professional and personal fallout, and we've had many difficult conversations about his choices and their consequences. While my instinct as his mother is to protect him, I cannot and will not excuse what he did to you and to Rebecca. The depth and duration of his deception is troubling beyond measure and speaks to issues far deeper than the fear of abandonment. He's been citing, "You were like a daughter to me for many years, Eleanor. I watched you grow from a shy, bookish teenager into a confident, compassionate young woman. I envisioned you as part of our family's future. Finding out that my son systematically betrayed you for years breaks my heart, both for you and for what it reveals about him. I don't expect forgiveness. Not for him, and perhaps not even for me, as I wonder if I somehow failed as a parent by not recognizing or addressing whatever brokenness led him to this behavior. But I did want you to know that I hold you in the highest regard and wish you every happiness as you move forward. If you're ever ready, I would welcome a conversation. But I also respect whatever boundaries you need to establish for your own healing. With love and regret, Margaret. Tears streamed down my face as I read her words. Margaret had always been a second mother to me, especially after my own mother's death during my sophomore year of college. The thought that I had lost not just Michael but his entire family, the future I'd imagined as part of their clan, had been another layer of grief I'd never fully processed. I replied immediately, "Dear Margaret, your email means more to me than I can adequately express. Thank you for believing me and for recognizing the impact of Michael's actions. That validation helps more than you know. I've never blamed you for any of this. Whatever choices led Michael to create his double life, they weren't the result of your parenting, but of his own decisions. You raised a son who, whatever his flaws, is intelligent, educated, and fully aware of the difference between right and wrong. He chose wrong, repeatedly and deliberately. I've missed you deeply this past year. When I lost Michael, I felt I lost my future family too, which reopened the wound of losing my own mother. I would very much like to meet when you feel the time is right. Perhaps we could start with coffee." With enduring affection, Eleanor pressing send on that email felt like another step in reclaiming my narrative, acknowledging that while my relationship with Michael was irreparably broken, not all connections from that chapter of my life needed to be severed. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in my focus. The furor around Eleanor's revenge began to die down as the internet's attention moved on to newer dramas. I continued to receive occasional messages from strangers sharing their own stories or thanking me for my courage, but the flood had slowed to a trickle. My 15 minutes of fame were ending and I was relieved. At work, I requested a meeting with my department head. "I'd like to discuss my career trajectory," I told her, summoning the boldness of my college self. "I've been in the same role for several years now, and I'm ready for new challenges." She seemed surprised. I'd never been particularly assertive about advancement before, but agreed to consider me for a more senior editorial position that was opening up. It would involve more travel, she warned, attending literary festivals, meeting with agents and authors in different cities. "Is that something you're prepared for?" "That sounds perfect, actually," I replied, realizing how constrained I'd allowed my world to become. How many opportunities had I declined because they didn't fit neatly into my life with Michael? How often had I chosen the safer, more predictable path to avoid disruption to our relationship? I was offered the promotion 2 weeks later. My first assignment would be attending a major publishing conference in London, followed by meetings with European authors and agents in Paris, Berlin, and Rome. The Eleanor who had fallen in love with Michael would have hesitated, worried about being away from him for nearly a month. The new Eleanor, or perhaps the original Eleanor rediscovered, booked her flights the day the itinerary arrived. "Look at you, reclaiming your European literary pilgrimage," Sophia observed as she helped me shop for professional clothing appropriate for international meetings. "College Eleanor would be so proud." "College Eleanor had better taste in men, too," I quipped, holding up a sleek blazer for her assessment. "Speaking of men," Sophia said casually, too casually, "have you thought about dating again?" I sighed, returning the blazer to the rack. "Honestly, it feels impossible. How do I ever trust anyone after what Michael did?" "Not all men create elaborate double lives across multiple states," she pointed out. "True, but the bar should be higher than doesn't secretly have another family." I moved to a display of scarves, running my fingers over the silky fabrics. "Besides, I'm not sure I'm ready. I spent 8 years with Michael, a year planning revenge, and now I'm just starting to figure out who I am on my own. I think I need to sit with that for a while." Sophia nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Just don't sit with it forever, okay? Michael already took enough years from you." Her words stayed with me. Was I allowing Michael's betrayal to steal my future as well as my past? Was avoiding relationships actually giving him continued power over my life? I didn't have answers, but at least I was asking the questions. The night before my departure for London, I met Margaret for dinner. We'd had coffee twice since her email, each meeting easier than the last as we carefully rebuilt our relationship independent of Michael. "You look wonderful," she said, embracing me as I arrived at the restaurant. "There's a lightness about you I haven't seen in years." "I feel lighter," I admitted as we settled at our table. "Like I've put down something heavy I didn't realize I was carrying." "The truth will do that," she said, her eyes crinkling with a sad smile. "For what it's worth, I think Michael feels it too, now that he's no longer living a lie. It doesn't excuse anything, but there's a certain freedom in facing consequences, however painful. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. We'd established early in our renewed connection that Michael would be a part of our conversations. It would be impossible to excise him completely, but that our relationship existed separately from him. "How is he?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than vengeful now. Margaret sighed. "Struggling but taking responsibility finally. He lost his job. They couldn't keep him after everything came to light. Some of his friends have stood by him, others haven't. He's in intensive therapy, trying to understand why he did what he did." She reached for her water glass. "He's moving back to Portland next month, actually." I froze, a forkful of salad halfway to my mouth. Portland? Why would he come back here? His father and I are getting older. He wants to be closer to family, especially now that his career has imploded. And I think... She hesitated. "I think he's hoping for some kind of redemption, though he's realistic enough to know it won't come from you." The thought of potentially running into Michael on the street sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Portland wasn't a small town, but it wasn't New York City either. Our social and professional circles had overlapped significantly when we were together. Margaret must have read my expression. "He knows you're still here, Eleanor. He's not coming back to disrupt your life or seek forgiveness. In fact, he's planning to live on the other side of the river and work in his father's business rather than marketing. The chances of your paths crossing are minimal." I took a deep breath, calming myself. "It's okay. Portland is my home, and I won't let the possibility of running into him change that." I smiled, trying to lighten the moment. "Besides, I'm leaving for Europe tomorrow. By the time I get back, I'll have had a month to adjust to the idea." "Europe?" Margaret's eyes lit up, and I was grateful for the change of subject as I told her about my promotion and upcoming trip. By the time we parted with a warm hug, my equilibrium had returned. Michael's potential return to Portland was a complication, but not one that would derail the new path I was creating. The European trip proved to be transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Beyond the professional growth of representing my publishing house at international events, I found myself rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant for years. In London, I slipped away from the conference to visit the homes of Virginia Woolf and Charles Dickens. In Paris, I spent a rainy afternoon in Shakespeare and Company, talking literature with strangers. In Berlin, I attended a poetry reading in a converted warehouse and felt the old urge to write stirring within me again. "You should come back for a longer stay," suggested Andreas, a German publisher I'd connected with professionally, and then befriended over late-night discussions about translated literature. "Rent an apartment for a summer? Write. Meet other writers. Berlin is good for creative souls." The idea took root. Why not? I had vacation time accumulated. I could work remotely for part of it. Nothing was tying me to Portland except habit and history. By the time I returned home, I had not only secured several promising international authors for my publishing house, but also a tentative plan to spend 2 months in Berlin the following summer. I'd even started writing again, small fragments of poetry and prose, nothing cohesive yet, but the creative channels were reopening. "Welcome back, world traveler." Sophia greeted me at the airport, pulling me into a hug. "You look different. European somehow." I laughed. "I don't think 4 weeks is enough to make me European." "It's not that," she insisted as we walked to her car. "You just look, I don't know, like you've expanded somehow. Like you're taking up more space in the world." Her observation was surprisingly accurate. I did feel expanded, as if the boundaries I'd unconsciously set around my life had been pushed outward, revealing new horizons. That sense of expansion continued in the months that followed. I excelled in my new role at work, bringing a confident energy to acquisitions and author relationships that earned me recognition from senior management. I joined a writing group that met weekly in a local bookstore, sharing my tentative return to poetry with supportive strangers who became friends. I finally redecorated my apartment, purging the last remnants of the life I'd shared with Michael and creating a space that reflected my current self. I even eventually went on a date. His name was Julian, a professor of comparative literature I'd met through my writing group. Our first meeting for coffee was awkward, weighted with my anxiety and rusty social skills, but he was patient and genuinely interesting. By our third date, dinner at a small Ethiopian restaurant, I found myself laughing easily, engaged in the kind of deep, meandering conversation that feeds the intellect and soul. "Can I ask you something personal?" Julian said as we shared a dessert of honey wine and baklava. You can ask, I replied cautiously. I might not answer. He smiled, acknowledging the boundary. Fair enough. I've noticed you tense up whenever relationships or past experiences come up. There's clearly a story there, and I'm wondering if you might share it? Not out of idle curiosity, but because I'm genuinely interested in knowing you better, including the difficult parts. I considered deflecting, offering some sanitized version of my history with Michael. But something about Julian's straightforward inquiry deserved honesty. Have you ever heard of Eleanor's Revenge? I asked. His eyebrows rose in recognition. The viral story about the woman who exposed her ex's double life at their high school reunion? That was you? I nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Does that change things? It tells me you've been through something extraordinarily painful and responded with remarkable courage, he said thoughtfully. And it explains your hesitation about dating. But no, it doesn't change my interest in knowing you better. He paused, though I will admit to a healthy new fear of ever disappointing you. The joke broke the tension, and I found myself sharing the condensed version of my history with Michael, Julian listening attentively without judgment or excessive sympathy. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes about time healing all wounds or not all men being liars. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you for trusting me with that story." We continued dating, carefully and slowly. Julian never pushed for more intimacy than I was ready to offer, seeming content to let our connection develop at its own pace. He was refreshingly transparent about his own life, his failed marriage in his 20s, his decision to switch from law to academia, his close relationship with his elderly father. Each piece of personal history he shared was an invitation for me to trust him further, and gradually, I found myself doing just that. I'm seeing someone? I told Rebecca during one of our monthly video calls. We'd maintained our friendship, finding that our connection had evolved beyond the shared trauma of Michael's deception into something genuine and supportive. That's wonderful, Eleanor. Her smile lit up the screen. Tell me everything. As I described Julian and our developing relationship, I realized I'd crossed an important threshold. I was talking about him with happiness rather than anxiety, excitement rather than dread. I'm really happy for you, Rebecca said when I finished. And a little envious, honestly. Dating in Chicago has been a disaster. No promising prospects? She sighed dramatically. Let's just say my standards are higher post-Michael, and the men of Chicago aren't rising to meet them. Their loss, I said firmly. How's everything else? Rebecca's career was thriving. She'd been promoted to a senior position at Apex Solutions and was leading a major new initiative. It's keeping me too busy to dwell on my non-existent love life, at least. She laughed. We chatted about work, friends, her new apartment, my upcoming Berlin summer, carefully dancing around the subject of Michael until the end of the call. Have you heard anything? She finally asked, the question that always hung between us, even when unspoken. He's back in Portland, I confirmed, working for his father's company. We haven't run into each other, though I know it's just a matter of time in a city this size. And how do you feel about that? I considered her question seriously, less than I expected to. There was a time when the thought of seeing him again would have sent me into a panic attack or a rage spiral. Now it's just uncomfortable, like the prospect of a slightly awkward social encounter rather than a catastrophic emotional event. Progress. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Real significant progress. That progress was tested sooner than I anticipated. The following week, I was meeting Sophia for dinner at a new restaurant in the Pearl District. I arrived early and was waiting at the bar when I heard a familiar voice ordering a drink a few seats away. My body recognized it before my brain did, tensing automatically as I turned to confirm what I already knew. Michael. He hadn't noticed me yet, focused on his conversation with the bartender. He looked different, thinner, with a short beard that he hadn't worn during our relationship, dressed more casually than his previous marketing executive style. There was a weariness to him that was new, visible in the slope of his shoulders and the lines around his eyes. I had a brief window to slip away unnoticed, to text Sophia and suggest a different restaurant, to avoid this confrontation entirely. But something in me rebelled against retreat. This was my city, my favorite neighborhood, a restaurant I'd been looking forward to trying. Why should I be the one to leave? Before I could reconsider, Michael turned and saw me. His face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, embarrassment, resignation, and finally, a careful neutrality. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you here." Likewise, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with the ambient noise of the busy restaurant. What do you say to the person who systematically deceived you for years? What words could possibly bridge that chasm? How are you? Michael finally asked, the mundane question almost laughable in its inadequacy. I'm well, I answered, surprising myself with the truth of it. Despite this unexpected encounter, despite the complicated emotions swirling through me at my core, I was well. You? He gave a small, humorless laugh. I've been better. Another pause. I heard you got promoted. International acquisitions, right? That's great, Eleanor. You always wanted to work with authors from around the world. I was startled that he remembered that detail from my early career aspirations, and more startled that he was aware of my professional developments. Your mother, I realized aloud. You've been keeping tabs on me through Margaret. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Not intentionally. She mentions you sometimes, that's all. She values your relationship. I value it too, I said firmly, establishing that boundary. Margaret and I have managed to maintain a connection that's separate from you and what happened between us. Michael nodded, accepting this. I'm glad. She was devastated when... He trailed off, unable to directly reference his betrayal. She missed you. The bartender returned with Michael's drink, breaking the tension momentarily. I glanced at my watch, hoping Sophia would arrive soon. I should let you get back to your evening, Michael said, picking up on my discomfort. He hesitated, then continued with visible effort. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry, Eleanor. Sorrier than I can adequately express. What I did to you and to Rebecca was unforgivable, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I am trying to be a better person, to understand why I did what I did, and make sure I never hurt anyone that way again. I studied his face, searching for the manipulation or self-pity I might have expected. But all I saw was exhaustion, and what appeared to be genuine remorse. I hope you succeed, I said finally. Not for your sake, but for whoever might trust you in the future. He nodded, accepting the barb within my response. That's fair. He picked up his drink. I'll get out of your way now. Michael? I called as he turned to leave. He looked back, a question in his eyes. I don't wish you ill, I said, realizing it was true only as the words left my mouth. I spent a year of my life consumed with anger toward you, planning how to make you feel as destroyed as I felt. But I'm done with that now. I genuinely hope you find whatever you need to stop hurting people. Something like relief flickered across his face. Thank you, he said simply. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd at the other end of the restaurant. Sophia arrived minutes later, immediately sensing something was off. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. In a manner of speaking, I replied, still processing the encounter. Michael was here. What? She whipped around, scanning the restaurant. Where is he? Did he say something upsetting? Do I need to create a scene? Despite the lingering emotional turbulence of seeing Michael, I laughed at Sophia's immediate leap to my defense. No scenes necessary. He's gone and it was surprisingly civil. As we were seated at our table, I recounted the brief exchange. Sophia listened with narrowed eyes, ever skeptical where Michael was concerned. So he's doing the whole redemption arc thing, she said when I finished. Color me unimpressed. One semi-decent conversation doesn't make up for years of elaborate lies. Of course not, I agreed. And I don't think that's what he was trying to do. He wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to reinsert himself into my life. He just seemed, I don't know, genuinely apologetic. Humbled, maybe. Well, humility looks good on him after all that arrogance. Sophia sniffed, then softened. The important thing is how you're feeling. Are you okay? I took a moment to check in with myself, to assess the emotional aftermath of seeing Michael face to face for the first time since the reunion. There was residual anxiety, certainly, and a faint echo of old pain. But the overwhelming rage that had fueled me for so long, the crushing grief, those were notably absent. I'm okay, I said, somewhat surprised by the realization. Not great, but okay. Like I just had a difficult work meeting, rather than an encounter with the man who shattered my world. I took a sip of my wine, considering. Maybe that's what closure actually feels like. Not perfect peace, but a kind of neutralization. Neutralization, Sophia repeated thoughtfully. I like that. Not forgetting or forgiving necessarily, just reducing something from radioactive to merely unpleasant. Exactly. I smiled at her perfect analogy. Michael has been neutralized. That neutralization held true in the following weeks. I didn't run into Michael again, but the fear of it happening no longer shadowed my movements around the city. If we crossed paths, we crossed paths. It would be awkward but survivable. My relationship with Julian continued to develop, enriching my life in ways I hadn't expected. He was different from Michael in almost every way. More contemplative, less socially dominant, genuinely interested in my thoughts and feelings rather than simply my admiration. Where Michael had always been in motion, climbing career ladders and building networks, Julian moved through life with thoughtful purpose, valuing depth over breadth in his pursuits and relationships. I've been invited to present at a literary conference in Berlin this summer, he mentioned one evening as we walked along the waterfront after dinner. Around the same time you'll be there, actually. That's quite a coincidence, I said, wondering if he was hinting at something. He smiled. Not entirely. When you mentioned your plans, I looked into opportunities that might overlap. The conference has been on my radar for years, but I've never had sufficient motivation to submit a proposal until now. And what's your motivation this time? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. The chance to explore Berlin with someone who makes everything more interesting, he said simply. If that's something you'd want, of course. I understand if you'd prefer to keep your experiences separate. I thought about it, appreciating that he'd left room for me to decline without awkwardness. My Berlin summer had been conceived as a solo journey, a continued exploration of my independent self. But the prospect of sharing parts of it with Julian was appealing rather than anxiety-inducing. I'd like that, I decided. Not the whole time. I still want my solo writing retreat experience, but having you there for part of it would be wonderful. His face brightened with genuine pleasure. That's the perfect arrangement. You'll have your space for writing and reflection, and we can meet for dinners or excursions when it suits us both. It struck me then how different this negotiation of boundaries and desires was from anything I'd experienced with Michael. Julian wasn't trying to shape my plans around his or vice versa. He was simply looking for the natural overlaps where our separate journeys might intersect, respecting my need for independence while expressing his own wish for connection. "What are you thinking?" he asked, noticing my thoughtful expression. "That healthy relationships are possible," I replied honestly, "and that I'm gradually learning to recognize them." He squeezed my hand in understanding, one day at a time. As spring turned to summer and my Berlin departure approached, I found myself in a state of anticipation rather than anxiety. My writing had gained momentum, with several poems accepted for publication in literary journals. My work continued to challenge and fulfill me. My relationships, with Julian, with Sophia, with my writing group, and yes, with Margaret, provided different forms of connection and support. Michael remained a peripheral figure in my awareness. I heard occasional updates through Margaret. He was doing well at his father's company, continuing with therapy, rebuilding relationships with family and the friends who had stuck by him. We had one more brief encounter at a grocery store, exchanging awkward nods before continuing on our separate ways. Each time it became easier, the emotional charge diminishing further. The night before my departure for Berlin, Sophia hosted a small going-away gathering at her apartment. Just a few close friends, Julian, and surprisingly Margaret, who had become something of a surrogate mother to me again. "I have something for you?" Margaret said privately, drawing me aside and pressing a small wrapped package into my hands. A travel gift. I opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, the paper thick and creamy. "It's lovely," I said, genuinely touched. "There's an inscription," she prompted gently. I opened to the first page, where Margaret had written in her elegant handwriting, "For Eleanor, who has always had her own story to tell. Write it boldly, live it fully." With love and admiration, Margaret tears pricked at my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, hugging her tightly. "For everything." "No thanks needed," she assured me. "Just promise me one thing?" I nodded and she continued, "Don't let Michael's chapter define your whole book. You have so many beautiful pages yet to write." I thought about Margaret's words on the flight to Berlin the next day, Julian asleep in the seat beside me. He'd arranged to travel together before continuing to his own accommodations. Don't let Michael's chapter define your whole book. For so long, that chapter had dominated my narrative, first as the great love story I thought I was living, then as the devastating betrayal that shattered my trust, and finally as the revenge plot that consumed a year of my life. But sitting on that plane, heading toward a city where I would write and explore and connect with a literary community, I realized that chapter was finally, truly closing. The apartment I'd rented in Berlin was perfect, a light-filled space in Prenzlauer Berg with high ceilings, wooden floors, and a small balcony overlooking a quiet courtyard. I settled in quickly, establishing a routine of morning writing, afternoon explorations, and evenings split between solitude and social engagements with Julian or the writers and artists I was meeting. 3 weeks into my stay, I received an unexpected email from Rebecca. Subject: a strange coincidence. Eleanor, life has a way of creating circular moments, doesn't it? I've just been transferred to Berlin for a 6-month project managing our European marketing expansion. I arrived yesterday and am still jet-lagged and disoriented, but remembered you were spending your summer here and thought I'd reach out. If you're open to it, I'd love to grab coffee and see a friendly face in this new city. Let me know, Rebecca. I stared at the email in disbelief. Rebecca. In Berlin. The woman who had been my unlikely ally, with whom I shared perhaps the strangest bond possible, was now in the same foreign city where I'd come partly to distance myself from the whole Michael saga. After my initial surprise faded, I realized I was genuinely pleased at the prospect of seeing her. Our friendship had always been unusual, born from shared trauma, but evolving into something more nuanced. We'd maintained contact through video calls and messages, but hadn't seen each other in person since the reunion. We arranged to meet at a cafe near Museum Island the following afternoon. I spotted her immediately as I approached, her tall figure and blonde hair distinctive even among the diverse Berlin crowd. She waved when she saw me, a bright smile lighting up her face. Eleanor, she embraced me warmly. What are the chances? Astronomically small. I laughed as we sat down. Of all the cities in all the world, as the saying goes. I promise I'm not stalking you, she joked. When they mentioned the Berlin assignment, I had a moment of, wait, isn't that where Eleanor is spending the summer? But it's such a big city, I figured we'd inhabit completely different corners of it. And yet, here we are. We spent the next 2 hours catching up properly, not just the highlights we usually shared in our calls, but the nuanced details of our lives. I told her about Julian, my writing revival, my complicated but healing relationship with Margaret, and my brief encounters with Michael. She shared stories about her promotion, a disastrous dating experience with a coworker, her mother's health challenges, and her mixed feelings about this international assignment. So, Rebecca said as we ordered a second round of coffee, have you written about it yet? About Michael, the revenge, all of it? I shook my head. Not directly. There are themes in my poetry. Betrayal, reclaiming identity, the aftermath of deception, but I haven't been able to approach it head-on. Why not? It's a hell of a story. I considered her question. I think because writing about it would mean fully inhabiting that experience again, and I've been focused on moving forward, not looking back. Plus, I added with a small smile, I've already told that story very publicly once. The reunion was my way of writing that narrative, just with a live audience instead of on paper. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. I understand that, but have you considered that writing it might help other women? Or that transforming it into art might be the final step in reclaiming it fully? Her suggestion stayed with me after we parted, promising to meet again soon. That evening, instead of working on my current poetry collection, I opened a new document and typed a single line. He promised to love me forever. I exposed his double life at our 10-year reunion. The words stared back at me from the screen, simultaneously familiar and strange. Could I transform my personal pain into something meaningful? Could my story, rendered as narrative rather than revenge, help others navigate similar betrayals or simply understand the complex aftermath of deception? Over the following weeks, between explorations of Berlin with Julian and occasional meetups with Rebecca, I began to write my story. Not as a vengeful exposé or a victim's lament, but as an honest examination of love, betrayal, revenge, and ultimately, redemption. My own redemption, not Michael's. The words flowed more easily than I'd expected, as if they'd been waiting patiently for me to be ready to release them. Julian read the first chapters one evening as we sat in my apartment, the summer twilight stretching long past what would be sunset in Portland. "This is extraordinary, Eleanor," he said when he finished, his eyes serious behind his reading glasses. "Painful to read in places, knowing it's your real experience, but powerful. You've transformed something ugly into something beautiful without diminishing the truth of it. Do you think anyone will care about my particular heartbreak? I asked, the insecurity of the writer surfacing. The world is full of betrayals and revenge stories, but none told exactly like this. With your particular insight and voice, he countered, the universality is in the specificity, not despite it. By the time my Berlin summer neared its end, I had completed a draft of what was becoming a memoir of sorts. I'd also finished a collection of poetry, explored every corner of the city, deepened my relationship with Julian, and formed an unexpected but genuine friendship with Rebecca, who had become my frequent companion at exhibitions and performances when Julian was busy with his conference or research. On my last night in Berlin, the three of us had dinner together at a restaurant overlooking the Spree River. It was a warm evening, the city humming with energy around us as we enjoyed a leisurely meal and reflected on our intersecting journeys. I have a confession, Rebecca said as we lingered over dessert. I knew you were in Berlin before I took the assignment. It wasn't the only reason I accepted it. Career-wise, it makes sense, but it was definitely a factor. I wanted to get to know you better, outside the shadow of Michael. I was surprised but touched by her honesty. I'm glad you did. Our friendship has been one of the unexpected gifts of this whole experience. Julian raised his glass. To unlikely connections, he toasted. And to Eleanor, whose courage in facing betrayal led her not to bitterness, but to new beginnings. Rebecca clinked her glass against his. Hear, hear. Though I maintain that the public humiliation at the reunion was also pretty satisfying. We all laughed, the moment lightened by her candor. As I looked between them, Julian, who represented my future possibilities, and Rebecca, who shared my complicated past, I felt a sense of completion. Not because my story was over, but because I had successfully integrated its disparate parts. The betrayed girlfriend, the vengeful ex, the emerging writer, the cautious new partner, all were aspects of the same whole person. Me, Eleanor, complete in myself, connected to others by choice rather than dependency. The flight back to Portland the next day was tinged with melancholy at leaving Berlin, but also with anticipation for what lay ahead. Julian would return a week later. My memoir draft needed revision but had potential. My poetry collection was nearly ready to submit to publishers. My promotion at work had become permanent, with more international travel in my future. Sophia was waiting at the airport, holding a ridiculous sign that read, "Welcome home, literary genius," decorated with glitter and book stickers. Really? I laughed, embracing her. What? I'm manifesting your future bestseller status, she insisted, grabbing one of my bags. Now come on, I want to hear everything about Berlin, especially the Julian parts. As we drove through Portland, the familiar landmarks comforting after my time away, I felt a strange sense of coming full circle. This city had been the setting for my greatest joy and deepest pain. It held the apartment I'd shared with Michael, the publishing house where I'd built my career, the coffee shops and bookstores and parks that had witnessed my breakdown and rebuilding. You're quiet, Sophia observed as we neared my neighborhood. Jet lag hitting already? Just thinking about how much has changed since the last time I drove this route with you. After the reunion, she remembered. You said you felt like you could finally start moving forward. And I have, I said softly, watching the city pass by outside the window. Further than I ever imagined. That evening, after Sophia left and I'd unpacked enough to feel settled, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, Fitzgerald purring in my lap, and opened Margaret's journal. I'd filled many of its pages in Berlin with observations, drafts of poems, reflections on my evolving understanding of love and betrayal. Now I turned to a fresh page and wrote, I used to think that loving forever meant one continuous, unbroken line from beginning to end, a promise that once made, either endured or failed completely. But I'm learning that forever isn't a single path. It's a series of choices made daily, hourly, in both grand gestures and small moments of consideration. Michael's promise to love me forever was broken, not because love isn't capable of lasting a lifetime, but because he never fully understood what that promise entailed. The constant choosing, the honest showing up, the courageous vulnerability required to love one person completely. My journey since discovering his betrayal has been about finding my own version of forever, not in another person's promises, but in my commitment to myself, to truth, to creating art from experience, to remaining open despite the risk of pain. Forever, it turns out, isn't about never ending. It's about fully beginning, again and again and again. The following morning, I woke to a text from Julian. He'd arrived safely at his conference in Madrid and missed me already. A message from Rebecca followed, sharing a photo of a Berlin street musician who regularly played outside my former apartment building. Sophia had sent a reminder about our dinner plans that evening. My editor had emailed about my return to work the following week, excited to hear about the connections I'd made in Europe. Each message represented a thread in the tapestry of my life. Connections that had survived betrayal or emerged from its aftermath, creating a pattern more complex and beautiful than the simple straight line I'd once envisioned with Michael. As I moved through my apartment, reacquainting myself with the space I'd created to reflect my independent self, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, sunlight highlighting the subtle changes in my face after a summer of growth and exploration. I looked seasoned, perhaps. Not older in a way that suggested wear, but in a way that spoke of experience metabolized into wisdom. The woman who had discovered Michael's betrayal had been broken, her sense of self and reality shattered by his deception. The woman who had planned and executed her reunion revenge had been fueled by rage and pain, determined to reclaim her power through public exposure of his lies. But the woman looking back at me now was neither victim nor avenger. She was simply herself, shaped by those experiences but not defined by them, carrying the lessons of betrayal without being weighed down by its burden. I thought of my book, the memoir that had begun as a way to process my pain and evolved into something more universal, an exploration of how we rebuild trust, identity, and hope after devastating deception. The manuscript sat on my desk, waiting for final revisions before I would share it with the world. Its working title, written in bold letters on the cover page, caught my eye. He promised to love me forever. I learned to love myself instead. It wasn't the revenge I'd once sought, this transformation of my story into art that might help others navigate their own betrayals. It was something better, redemption not just of the narrative Michael had tried to control, but of the future he had nearly stolen from me with his lies. Outside, Portland continued its Saturday morning routines, joggers in the park across the street, the farmer's market setting up a few blocks away, a neighbor walking a dog that looked remarkably like Michael's new husky. Life went on, with or without grand betrayals and elaborate revenges. The ordinary moments, coffee in favorite mugs, sunlight through windows, cats demanding breakfast, messages from people who truly care, these were the true measure of a life reclaimed. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Julian, Rebecca, and Sophia, the three people who had helped me most on my journey from betrayal to rebirth. Home again, finding that the best revenge isn't exposure or humiliation after all. It's living well, loving honestly, and telling your own story, exactly as it happened, exactly as you experienced it. Thank you for being part of mine. Then I opened my laptop, made a fresh cup of coffee, and began the final revisions to my book. Not Michael's story, not even our story, but mine alone. The story of a woman who had been betrayed by false promises of forever, who had sought revenge in a moment of spectacular public reckoning, and who had ultimately discovered that the most powerful act of all was to claim authorship of her own life, writing each new chapter with hard-won wisdom and open-hearted courage. Forever, as it turned out, wasn't about someone else's promise. It was about my own commitment to living authentically, loving carefully, and moving forward. One word, one day, one choice at a time.